it's my pleasure to introduce Sue Stodola. We have become friends. We talked about 6 weeks ago, and Sue expressed her interest in becoming a mentor. And however, she's going to put that on hold for a bit because she's going to be assuming a new position. But Sue comes to us with an amazing background in criminal justice. For the past 40 years, she's been she started out as a volunteer in the boys' prison, and then she became an adult probation officer in Illinois. She has a 28-year career with the Maricopa County Adult Probation Department as an officer, and later as a supervisor of probation officers. For the past 15 years, she has worked as a capital mitigation specialist. And Susan, I'm going to ask you to explain that when I finish introducing you, because Gay and I had the most amazing experience learning what that was. And she's been an independent contractor, and she represents individuals charged with murder and facing the death penalty. She just has an incredible background on trauma, the effects of poverty, everything that we talked about, the social determinants of health. So she brings that to us, and she is going to talk to us today about the whole process of what she's going to share her experiences, but similar to when we've had another person inside the prison providing some information. She's going to provide us with a different perspective, I believe. So Sue, I'm going to turn that over to you. And
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Pam. So hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about what I do, but not really just for the purpose of explaining what I do, really for the purpose of explaining why I'm in the prison. And then I thought I would talk to you a little bit about my experiences in the last 15 years as a mitigation specialist going to the prison. And then actually, I think I mentioned to Pam one occasion, but actually I forgot about another. On 2 occasions, I've worked as an informal mentor with 2 women who came out of prison, one who spent a very long time in prison. And I was with her and still am in touch with her, but with her especially about 5 years as she got out of prison and what that was like for her. And then another woman that I was an informal mentor to, I guess you could say, for a shorter period of time. So anyway, well, and then please, if I don't get to your questions, I'm sure Pam can email them to me and I can get to them tomorrow if I can't accomplish everything. And I have about 25 minutes to speak, so I'm going to speak quickly. So as a capital mitigation specialist, as Pam said, I work on all murder cases. Most of them, for most of the 15 years, have been death penalty cases. I worked for the public defender's office on trials when the state filed the notice to seek the death penalty. Then I was part of that team. I'm not a lawyer. Mitigation specialists have long backgrounds in criminal justice. I have a master's degree in counseling. Some are forensic social workers, but we all, the common denominator is some are psychologists. We all have a counseling, mental health background, and usually a criminal justice background. I also now work on what's called juvenile life without parole cases. These were individuals who committed murder as children, basically 16, 17 years old. They now maybe are 48, 52 years old, have been in prison all these years. And because of 2 Supreme Court cases, those cases are coming back for reconsideration to make them parole eligible. So I actually have a hearing on one of those cases next week in Tucson that we were able to get a hearing on. Anyway, in my capacity as a mitigation specialist, and what I do is I just wrote down a couple, I could talk about it forever, but it's putting together a jigsaw puzzle. It's putting together all the factors in that person's life that led them to commit murder. The usual common denominator is trauma. There's intergenerational trauma. I have to look at mental health. I go back generationally. If there's mental health issues, I have to look at parents, grandparents. I look at environmental factors. Could the mother, when she was pregnant with this child who later grew up and committed murder, could that mother have been exposed to toxins so that that baby was born with brain damage? We hire neurologists and forensic psychiatrists who testify on cases, and we do all kinds of things. But the goal of the mitigation specialist is to develop that life history, order records. We don't just go by what the client tells us, but order records, talk to teachers who might have been their teacher 40 years ago who still remember them. Yes, I remember when he was 6 years old, he was talking to himself. I thought back then something was wrong. Interview neighbors who may have heard fights in the house, all that kind of thing. So anyway, I could talk about that forever, but it brings me to the prison because as a mitigation specialist, most of the work I do now is on post-conviction. So they're on death row. They got death. And then when someone gets death in the state of Arizona, there's automatic appeals. There's the direct appeal, post-conviction. And then if we don't get relief, what's called habeas, it goes to the federal public defender. So I'm kind of in that middle stage, post-conviction, which is state. So I'm on death row, and also with my other clients, I'm in various locations in the prisons, wherever they might be. That could be Safford, Florence, I'm in Tucson. Now I have some in the private prison, which is a whole nother story at La Palma. So again, this is men. In the last 15 years, as a mitigation specialist, I haven't had women in prison. It's the women, though, I've worked with, who I've mentored. But I would say overall, things are not so great in the prison. We are all thankful that, and I made to make sure I got his name right, Ryan Thornell has come in under Governor Hobbs. He, I think already I'm hearing, is making changes. But I want to talk about I don't want to talk about just how bad the prison is. I want to be able to talk about it as it relates to what you may see with some of the women coming out. So we'll start with medical. And there's a reason why I'm going to tell you this, because you may see it with some of the women coming out. Medical is not good in the prison. You may all know about a huge lawsuit. And this summer, Judge Silver, actually, I guess it's called taking receivership, because so many inmates were dying. I had a client die literally about 3 years ago, a wonderful man who died because he couldn't get the medical care that he needed. So I have a client now who has a huge growth on his shoulder, can't get seen. That growth has impeded his ability to move his arm. Why is that important? If he gets out one day, it's going to curtail jobs that he's able to get. There are people with all of these horror stories with not getting proper medical care. When they come out, including the women, both women that I worked with, had major medical problems, anywhere from, teeth was a big one, having gum disease, to actually having diabetes, but not being treated for it in the prison, to another one that had chronic pain. Pain is not treated as it should be in the prison. They're given sometimes aspirin, they're given Tylenol, but when pain medication is needed, even for individuals who have no drug history of using oxycodone, they're not able to get pain medication. And so rather than go into the story of what we do at our end to get them the pain medication, when they come out, what happens is sometimes when people are in chronic pain and can't relieve, don't have an ability to alleviate their pain, it actually affects their brain and it affects their thinking process, because when you're in pain, you can't concentrate. You sometimes can't problem solve because your entire focus is on the pain. So one of the women I had, when she got out, had pain for years, almost it became used to it, but not really, because it had affected, besides a medical condition that she had, it had affected her ability to concentrate, it had affected her ability to follow through, it had affected her ability to plan. So untreated medical conditions can turn into psychological conditions, and it can turn into where you're just sitting there, if you don't know that, thinking, how come she never follows through with anything? You know, I've asked her 5 times to, you know, consider doing such and such, and each time she acts as if it's the first time I'm telling her. It's not necessarily that they have signs of Alzheimer's, although there is also correlation with untreated pain and early Alzheimer's that we all just need to keep in the back of our heads. But there's the fact that medical conditions turn into physiological and psychological conditions. So if you find someone who you're like, why doesn't she ever do this? I'm not saying that that's the reason, but I would say take a look at that if you can. I mean, you're not going to necessarily have her history, but you can ask those kind of questions. You know, did you have medical issues in the prison? Were you ever treated for it? How were you treated? What kind of medication were you given? I have an inmate right now with swelling because of a cancerous condition, and he asked for ice. He asked for ice once. He asked for ice again, and the prison said, no, we're not giving it to you. We gave it to you already. That's ice. So, but you know, I won't try to go down that path for just the sake of telling you horror stories. I think what you need to know is just what I said about these sometimes untreated medical conditions. And then also in terms of mental health, we have a lot of the women, and certainly the 2 women I worked with, had anxiety. It's hard to come out of the prison without anxiety, often just related, not just related to being out. I mean, they've been in. One woman I worked with was in for a long, long time. Another one was in for a shorter time, but they both had anxiety related to everything, related to, oh my God, I'm out. What do I do now? When you're in prison, I think, as you know, decisions are made for you. There's not a lot, there's a little, but not a lot of choice and free thinking. Anything from the time you go out on the yard, to what time you eat, to what time you go to bed, all those things. And with both the women, I'll just tell you these stories. What was interesting is both of them took them out to lunch soon after they were released. I was stunned, but shouldn't have been, but was, by the fact that they couldn't order from a menu. I saw both of them and I can picture them. I gave them a menu. We went out to lunch, something we all do, don't think twice about it. And they just were staring at it like, and finally what I realized when one told me, one didn't tell me, it was just overwhelming. Like how in the world do I choose from this menu? So what I learned to do, and they asked me to do it, was to narrow it down. Hey, let's say her name is Mary. Hey, Mary, you could have a salad with chicken, or a hamburger. What interests you? That helped. And that kind of narrowing down in choice, especially for women just getting out, not necessarily 3 years later, but for some of them just getting out, that was what they needed. They were overwhelmed with everything. And so even which restaurant do you want to go to? We could go to A, B, or C. Which one interests you? Sometimes we would go, they loved nature. There's something, as it is for all of us, healing, and especially healing for them, these 2 that I'm thinking of. So we would go to the Desert Botanical Gardens, and that almost became overwhelming too. Like, which path do we go down? You know, there's this path, and then you could go that way. And so sometimes at the beginning, I would just pick. It was like, let's just go this way. And then maybe when we get over here, you tell me which way you want to go back. Things that you don't even think about, but they would like, well, do I go this way? Do I go that way? And then they would get anxious. But nature, I know I'm just like babbling on a bit, but nature is a huge healer. So while at times we would go and have lunch so we could talk, I realized, you know, we could talk and walk at the same time. We can talk and hear birds chirp. We can talk and they can see at the Desert Botanical Gardens, maybe like a little bunny rabbit walk by. We would go to the zoo. That seemed to just be incredibly healing for them, as it is for all of us, but things they hadn't seen in a long time. The other thing, I'm just looking at my notes here for a second. there was a lack of nutrition. There's a lack of nutrition in prison. You probably already know that. The vegetables are boiled to death if they get any. Fruit is scarce. It's kind of a lot of slop most of the time. People who have money or have people putting money on their accounts are able to buy better food, like maybe a little can of tuna or something, a higher grade than what they're eating in the prison. The one woman I had family putting money on her books. Another one never did. So she barely, unless through the kindness of other inmates, would other women would buy her things. She was pretty much subject to that. So I'll tell you just a little story. One of the women I was with, when she first got out, we bought her a vegetable sandwich, and it was filled with avocado slices and sprouts and cucumbers. And she bit into it and started to cry. It was so incredibly delicious to her, and her taste buds, you know, first of all, had to get used to it. But she, again, things, what do we think twice when we have a cucumber? Of course not. But eating a sandwich like that, so different from something she ate, was just a joyous occasion. So you don't have to always take the women out to lunch. You could certainly, another thing to, nice thing to do is just have a picnic lunch, like make it yourself, go out, have a picnic and eat together. The things like that I never thought about were, it wasn't, I was with one of the women as she was released, and we were driving down the highway, and she was amazed and fascinated by the buildings. Oh my God, when did that building get there? And where did that building come from? Things like that. But the question people always would ask me is, were they most overwhelmed with having to use a computer? Well, not really. They were both smart women, and they each had a friend that kind of taught them how to use it, and they learned the basics. And then as time went on, they learned other basics. What was far more difficult was, I think, just making choices, deciding what they were going to do. I even stopped asking questions like, "Hi, Mary, what are you doing this weekend?" And they would be like, they had no idea. I had to learn, you know, a question we might ask each other. I would say, "Tell me one thing on Sunday that you'd like to do." And that, you know, seemed to be better. But just, what are you doing this weekend was beyond, at the beginning, especially, their ability to think, figure that out, decide, how do I do that? How do I get there? Too much. Sleep is a major problem, can be a major problem. All night long in the prisons, and I would imagine it's the same everywhere, there's a lot of noise. There's a lot of clanging. Sometimes there's people screaming. It's very, very difficult to sleep. Therefore, people come out with sleep, difficulties in sleeping. Things that I did with the women I worked with is I got them tapes, just relaxation tapes. We talked about like having a set time to go to bed, reading before bed. But I didn't feel it was my place to say, well, you could take sleeping pills. So I just focused on relaxation exercises, which are easy enough to find on the computer. But sleep, as we all know, for those of us who don't always sleep, the next day can be very difficult to function. And the nights you do sleep, the world is a better place the next day. So sleep was a problem. I would encourage you all there. I don't know of any woman, especially for the ones who have been in for a long time, but you can be in for a short time and have this affect you, who don't need counseling when they come out. It doesn't mean they need counseling forever, but it means that there's so much to get used to that it's real hard to sort it out yourself. And you may have family members with the best of intentions, but say the worst things, like, just get over it. You're out now, you know. Well, it doesn't quite work that way. So sometimes family can be great. Sometimes family can be a hindrance. Both women got involved in counseling, and they stayed, and then they went back at times as well. It's real hard, the trauma of that they may have endured in prison, or the trauma, let's say their prison experience, they didn't have trauma, but the trauma they came in with, the trauma, if you want to say, of coming out of prison and acclimating back to the world is real difficult. So it's real hard to do that with no therapy. And it doesn't mean that as a mentor, you're there to support them. I would say, and you can talk to, Pam and about this, but we're not there as therapists. And even I was not their therapist. I did not want to take, I can't take on that role, didn't want to take on that role. I was encouraging them, though, to see and stay with a therapist, because I think that's really important. But something I wanted to mention and get back to when I was talking about hardships, even walking up a curb, I noticed that was difficult because in prison, there really aren't curbs. So something I would never think that, but the balance for one, especially, and it wasn't her age, but it was just hard to walk up and down a curb. Another woman, I think I told this story to Pam, I was with her in a bathroom. I was washing my hands. She was in a stall and I heard this kind of like scream. And it was like, oh my God, Susan, I didn't know if toilets flush themselves. It's so depending on how long someone's been locked up, you may have women where the world has changed, not just computers, but like a toilet that flushes. That was something she had no idea that happened. Like, what's this? There's a lot of, what's this? Oh my God, what is this? I've never seen this before, never experienced that. So being a mentor to me was just, well, it was a fabulous experience, but it was an eye-opening experience. I had one woman tell me that it was almost like she was lifted off the earth. She thought of herself as an alien, like she was gone for X amount of years and then came back and the world kept going, everything continued, and she had to get used to it. And that was someone who was seeing people in between. She wasn't isolating, but still coming out was difficult. Moods changed. I had to realize at times, like she's not mad at me. I would take it like, well, oh my gosh, did I say something? Well, I might have, but it's when you're faced with all those choices on the outside, that can affect your mood too. It can cause depression. It can cause isolation. Like I found that sometimes they were so used to being alone that they really needed a lot of alone time. So if I would say, hey, do you want to go to a movie? Do you want to have a picnic? It would be, no, I just need to be by myself. So I realized that it wasn't me. That's their need. They were used to isolation. It didn't just go away the second they got out of prison. That was still a big part of it. Again, if I said they need a therapist, they also need a doctor. As I was talking about with medical, something that you could do to help them is help them get, if you want, set up with just an MD and maybe a OBGYN for women, that because of the medical care, don't assume that they've received it, and they need absolutely a really good checkup when they get out to begin with. And I found that they shouldn't overwhelm themselves. I'm not saying that you would do it, but anyone gets out there like, oh my God, I got to get a job and I have to do this and I have to do that. And then all of a sudden it's too much and they just freeze. So it's kind of one thing at a time. What is the first thing that you need to do? For a lot of women, it's getting a job. Just concentrate on that. Let's not even talk about the next things, because just like life can be overwhelming for all of us, it can really be overwhelming for someone who's been locked up for a long time. And maybe last, I also encourage people to get involved with a religious organization, whether it be church or something spiritual. It also makes it, as well as bring just a handle that you can rely on. So I think that is something also that's important. So I think that might be, and get a pet. The two women I had got dogs, and it really, really helped them. Something to love, something to take care of, made all difference. A cat, just something that they themselves are caring for and in charge of. There's a lot of psychological effects that help them with having a pet. So I think that those are that's what I would want to talk about. I think all of you, what you're doing is wonderful. It's so needed. It's really, really needed. And I think it'll be a really enlightening experience for you and very, very rewarding. And a lot of these women, I also want to say, are incredibly resilient. And I can't even begin to tell you what I've learned from them. It's more that I think I learned more from them that they ever could have gotten from me. I learned how to they taught me how to make it in the most difficult of situations. And I just used to shake my head with, I can't believe you got through that, or how did you get through that? They are incredibly resilient people. I think we have a lot to learn from them for our own lives.
Wow, Susan, that was really enlightening for us. Very, very good information for us that are going to be mentors or are currently mentors. I'm going to throw it out there. We have a couple of minutes for questions, if you have them, and then we will introduce April.
Okay.
So, any questions that you might have? Barb?
When I had a mentee, and when I met with her, she did want to sit outside, which was good for lunch. I did not ask her questions because I felt her story was hers to tell me when she wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
But should I have been more caring about her and asked some kind of question so that she knew I had an interest in her, but I didn't want to be snoopy?
I think that depends on the woman, actually. It depends on who you're working with. I think you're right, actually. It's when they want to talk about it. Sometimes I would ask a question like, when you were inside, what kind of classes or programs did you take? And then that would lead to a discussion. I already knew why they were there. I didn't ask a lot of questions in that capacity. When I was doing that, I wasn't a mitigation specialist. I was a mentor. So I didn't ask a lot of questions about their background, their life story at first. That came later, but just maybe a question about, what they did while they were inside, a job, a program. Some of them might have a tablet now, things they like to look up on their tablet, kind of just general questions, but not real probing questions. But yes, I think you're absolutely right.
My question is, do they come out knowing what services are available to them in terms of like medical care? Are they eligible for Medicaid? Are they eligible for any kind of social services? If they don't have any money, what do they have?
Well, maybe Bridget should answer that question in terms of what resource information you provide.
I think Dorothy's probably best to. Do you want to tackle that one, Dorothy?
Well, we do have a resource index that we give to mentors. It has a list of different categories like housing, counseling, education, jobs, employment, all a really good list of resources. And then we have, the mentors each have Pam and Gay to go to ask questions. So that's another resource for them. Let me think something else.
Many of them have if they're part of our release day pickup program that Dorothy runs,
right?
Many of them will have essentials for the first day, like soaps and shampoo and toothpaste and toothbrush and clothes, and we give them a voucher for our thrift store so that they can go in and get an outfit. And the Second Chance Center at Perryville is working really hard to to provide them with the information that they need for their medical care and for transportation. We also give them bus passes if they need it. And they know that they have a certain amount of time, 48 hours, to go to report to their parole officer. I mean, they know that. Most of the people that we deal with they have parole time, so they have to be accountable to them. But the system is not perfect.
Right.
And April can probably talk to that a little bit more when she talks.
We also have a method where we can help them get their medical records transferred from the prison system to their primary care physician or provider, and also to help them set up the primary care physician and provider. It could be a nurse practitioner. So we do have a system in place for that, and it's for the Magdalene House women. We're extending it to mentees, getting them aware of it in the beginning and getting them signed up.
So if they aren't in that second chance center, do you or do they get help setting up medical insurance or access? Or, I mean, is there a process for that if they haven't been through that?
They start it when they are inside, and then when they get out, they're instructed that they have to make this phone call to have their phone interview. April can tell you exactly how that works, but everybody has to go through it. They get instructions before they're out, knowing that they have to make those contacts.
Okay, thank you.
You will have a handbook. In fact, since so many of you have been now assigned mentees, we will be getting that out to you. Since we missed last week, you would have had all that information. This would have been our fourth one training session, but I will make certain that you get the checklist and the handbook and all of that. Dorothy just updated a lot of the handbook and the checklist. So this will be very helpful for you to have, and I'll make certain that is emailed to you. In terms of the resource list, you can go onto our website at bridgesreentry.org, and the resource list is on our website. So,
Oh, great. Thank you.
okay. With that, I think maybe I'll turn it over to Deacon Gay to
Okay.
introduce April.